If the curiosity takes you, you can walk the footpaths from Acle or take the farm track from the South Walsham Road. But either way, it's a journey from curiosity to wonder when you discover the 12th century church of St Mary's at Fishley. The church is in the grounds of Fishley Hall, owned in the 19th century by John Squire. His wife Emma's gravestone can be seen in the graveyard to this very day. Today the churchyard is immaculately laid out with graves both old and new, but that wasn't the state of things a few years ago, before the regeneration of St Mary's started.
The path was overgrown, the hedges were very tall, the lime trees on the southern boundary not been coppiced for maybe 40 years. Undergrowth was very forward here, very dark, foreboding, and that applied equally to the eastern boundary.
Not difficult at all. We had loads of people, working parties who came up here who were only too willing to give their time and bring their equipment to help us to do all this. I mean, a great friend of mine, Mark, who I treat like my son, he came and topped the trees, cut the trees, or started them, and then my neighbour, he's got a chainsaw. He was only too happy to cut the trees down in the hedges.
It was in February 2009 that the church wardens established a working open day every Friday, part of their commitment to the Open Churches project. Its success was immediate and remarkable. It attracted all sorts of people, ready to restore this gem of a churchyard in a Saxon village. People like Brian Capes.
He came to Norfolk to retire but found a great interest in this church and just loved doing all the bits of woodwork and things like that. Really, he looked forward to it every week. It was lovely. And he enjoyed, of course, making the little tiny candles that put along, but unfortunately he never finished them.
This was the last part of the churchyard to be cleaned and cleared and restored. At that time, the cross laid in the hedge, and this was Brian's last task. The top of the monument was just into the ground. At his own wish, cost and skill, he has restored it, out of which in this book is the whole history of the Broome family graves, and he has restored it to its former glory. And his dying wish was to lay alongside his final project.
And this wonderful outside work at St Mary's continues with the same enthusiasm and success today. But inside, the church had also suffered with the passing years, and this required more than just enthusiasm and time. It needed hard resources.
So one of our first tasks was to replace some slates and to completely replace the ridge, and that made it watertight. Then the windows externally were completely covered in chicken wire netting and wooden battens. We suffered a degree of vandalism and we restored that damage, and progressively we worked around all of the windows, taking the wire netting off and replacing them with English Heritage approved stone guards.
Ivan, Chloe, what made you take on this task?
Well, because I just loved the church and felt it needed to be loved and brought back to life, really.
And so the restoration project really got underway. Well, walls and windows are one thing, but when it comes to a crumbling tower, the problem has a whole new dimension, a major reconstruction.
Well, £100,000, that sort of order, for the restoration of the tower. Other figures, well, we didn't know, we didn't even have a plan to start with. We just simply sat down, wrote a list of things that we could visibly see that were wrong, that needed attention, and progressively we just started to do them. We set an example, other people came along and helped. Particularly with Chloe's coffee mornings, on one particular period where we had vandalism to the windows, £800 was raised in 2 hours, and it just built.
Chloe, how did you feel when you first started to hear these figures of money required bandied around in front of you?
Well, I didn't really look at the figures. I opened my house and had that first coffee morning, which, I only live in a small bungalow, but that felt as if there's so many people, they were pushing the walls out, you know. And when we added up the money, just couldn't believe we'd got over £800, as Ivan said, in 2 hours. And since then, people have supported all my fundraising and only been too pleased to bring stuff, help me, and it's just amazing. And what they've done, they haven't asked for the money, and the money's just come in.
And to be fair, so have the people. They passed through a set of newly crafted iron gates, forged especially for St. Mary's, with the first St. Mary in mind. On a day of celebration, Rector Martin Greenland welcomed Bishop Graham, Bishop of Norwich.
Just a word or two about the gates. I never saw their predecessors, which I gather were wooden and in a rather shocking state. More about them later. But it was my predecessor who initiated their replacement, and his idea was taken up by Peter Kerslake, who was very keen to design. So with Dan's help, they eventually settled on this design, A.M. Ave Maria, the Virgin Mary being the patron of this church. And the gates were actually fabricated by a Dutchman, Kees Anema, I pronounce it. He is here, is he?
And Peter.
Right.
Lynn and Peter, would you step forward? Lynn?
Right. And Lynn as well, Lynn Kerslake. So, thank you very much.
It was absolutely right that Martin began by expressing gratitude to those who have designed and made these gates, to Peter and to Kees. And they replaced some rather inadequate, as I'm told, and worn-out gates. And I suspect they're just the latest in a long line of replacements since this church has been here for so long. It's difficult to believe as you approach St. Mary's now that it might have once overlooked a harbour, a much busy activity. And here it is, situated in open farmland, no village surrounding it, and yet it's come to life again in recent years. Our parish churches, and we're not short of them in this diocese, more than anywhere else in Western Europe, as I know, when you've got nearly 700, you could have a new one almost every week. They witness to the process of decay and renewal, even of death and resurrection. We've got some churches that were made redundant that are now open again. And we don't actually make them redundant anymore if we can possibly avoid it. The Jesus Christ who's honoured here is our crucified and risen Lord, and it's only to be expected that we see in our buildings and in our church congregations that process of decay and renewal, because that's what the Christian faith leads us to believe in. There is no such thing as permanent death. Life is for resurrecting.
And it wasn't the only resurrection on that day. Wood from the inadequate doors, which the bishop had described, had been carved into a memorial cross, a reminder for him of the new from the old at Fishley.
Kind of you to give this away too. There we are, we're holding the cross. whenever you feel you need a bit of support, that's the thing to grab hold of. Please remember that. Very, very good. And I shall treasure this.
What about the usage of the church now? In what ways has that increased and changed?
The services are just the same, 2 services a month, but the dramatic increase is probably in visitors who come on a Friday. Until we started the Friday Open Day, we didn't appreciate or know how many people visited this tiny little remote church from all over the world, let alone Norfolk and far beyond.
Chloe, weddings?
Yes, that was amazing when we had started to have the weddings, and obviously the big wedding we had here was Philip Monilute and his wife-to-be, but she joined us as a working party 2 years before. She'd come whenever we had a working party, and even did the roof, went up on the roof and bitumened the roof. And the week before her wedding, when we scrubbed the church out, she was here helping us. And because we had 106 people in this church for that wedding. And from then on, we just had weddings after weddings, because that was so wonderful.
You mentioned there are people from around the world. How far around the world, Ivan?
Belgium, America, Australia, and we're in contact with people in New Zealand, and we did have a visitor from somewhere in South America, and of course particularly from the continent we have people. We are fortunate to be in a holiday area, so people certainly come to the Norfolk Broads, they moor their boat at Upton, and they walk across the fields to Fishley and then on into Acle to get provisions.
And there's plenty in the church, of course, to attract these visitors. Flower festivals, harvest festivals, history displays about the history of Fishley, and then, of course, the weddings and the funerals. So looking back now over these successful years and yet more to come, what's your message really to people who are in similar circumstances to that in which you were some years back? What's your message to people whose churches are failing?
Well, just to welcome everybody, despite what religion they are. And we don't push religion to the people. We just welcome them all in and treat them all the same.
And it's all a question of confidence, Ivan?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Just be yourself, be natural, welcome people and bring them to you and demonstrate what you have, what your individual church has to offer, because of the 650 churches that we have in this diocese, each is unique to itself. So explain it to people as they come.